History Revisited. The 1st of January, 2011. Certain names have loomed large in history of the Philippines over the past 100 years. Without being unjust to those who made a meaningful contribution to the independence and autonomy of the Philippines, it can be fairly claimed that the names which have attracted the most public attention are those of Jose Rizal, Ferdinand Marcos, Tomoyuki Yamashita, and perhaps Don Esteban Benitez Tolano. Everyone has their own story to tell of the good work of Rizal in terms of his patriotic writing, of Ferdinand Marcos and martial law, of Tomoyuki Yamashita and his buried treasure, and of course the Tolano clan and their claim as true title holders of the original Spanish land title known as OCT number T-01-4. The writer of this article holds that those 4 names are universal conversation pieces in the Philippines, and few evenings pass that one or another is not mentioned in conversation with friends and associates. One would imagine that with such names being universal conversation pieces, that nothing in their life has been spared intense scrutiny, and that there is nothing yet to be revealed about their respective lives. If there is nothing yet to be revealed about their lives, then please explain, among other mysteries, A. where one would find the Rizal, and B. why are there no Japanese visitors to the shrine for Tomoyuki Yamashita? In following pages we try to revisit published history, with a view to bringing a clear understanding of the role that each played in the mysterious forces which acted to promote the Philippines we know today. Of course we shall need a starting point, and because it bears relevance to what we investigate, we choose as our starting point the birth of Queen Victoria of England, on the 24th of May, 1819. Now the published story of Queen Victoria's birth at Kensington Palace was not entirely accurate, even though she did reach Kensington Palace on the same day as her birth. In fact, she arrived in this life somewhat earlier than expected, while her mother, Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Salford, was aboard a Dutch ship in the English Channel, near Dover, as she sped to meet up with her husband at Kensington Palace for the expected birth. That variation between published fact and reality was simply to preserve the concept of born on English soil on behalf of a woman destined to become the future Queen of England. Again, what is not published, but is widely known within the establishment of England, is that Queen Victoria was one of twins, and had a brother. That boy was, in all probability, autistic, a condition little understood at the material time, and the courtiers decided that he was unsuitable to be raised in precincts of the court, and while every facility possible was placed at his disposal, he was kept separated from the court, and educated privately. Badge of the North Borneo Company. Note the Lion of Scotland and the name MacLeod. In his late 20s, the young man, brother of the Queen, moved to Borneo, then known as the Dutch East Indies, and became entranced with the life, adventure, and business opportunity offered by that country. In conjunction with Baron von Overbeck, he formed and became chairman of the North Borneo Company, which engaged in exploitation of the natural resources of that country. His name? He was known as Prince Julian MacLeod Tolano. Being of princely bearing, well-educated and clearly wealthy, he was introduced to a number of eligible women, and eventually became enamored of, and married, the Princess Tahuta. Mark now that North Borneo was Muslim territory, and in taking his Muslim wife, Prince Julian MacLeod Tolano converted to the Islamic faith, thus fusing the religious affiliations of both his motherland and Borneo, as he was a prince of the royal blood. Likewise, that marriage interwove the fortunes of the 2 distinct clans of differing faiths. Tolano as a Muslim, acquired 7 wives, but still maintained the libertine pursuits of his early life. His pursuit of another princess, and their liaison, beyond marriage, produced a male child. With connivance of the Catholic Church, a means was found to provide for welfare of the child. Today one hears many stories of the orphan found in a basket outside the home of the Mercado family in Calamba, Laguna Province, about 50 kilometers south of Manila. The boy was raised by the Mercado family, and given the name Jose Protasio Mercado. The child grew, and proved to be extremely intelligent. He was incredibly active, and wanted to be the best at all he undertook. He referred to himself as Rex, Al, the king of all, which name soon became adapted to Rezal, and so we have Jose Protasio Rezal. The child had been well provided for in terms of money, and while it was unusual for the times, he went to Madrid to study, since he was proficient in the Spanish language. Spain caused him to reflect on the number of blind persons in the population, and he determined to become a doctor with specialty in the eyes. He chose to study under a particular professor, and went to Paris, to join the classes of that professor, but found that the professor had moved to a university in Heidelberg, Germany. He followed to Germany, mastered the German language, and eventually took his medical degree in 1886. As a doctor, he now sought patients. There was resistance to eye surgery, because few chose to allow anyone to operate on their eyes, but one young student at Heidelberg University was desperate to have her eyes corrected, and so that student, Josefine von Bracken, became the first patient of Jose Rizal. The operation was a success, and Josephine Bracken very quickly introduced her uncle, the King of Prussia, Wilhelm I, favorite grandson of Queen Victoria, then German Emperor, at Potsdam, near Berlin, who had similar eye problems. Again the operation was a success, and the fame of Jose Rizal as an ophthalmologist was assured. The Emperor of Germany, grateful for the work of Rizal, dedicated the ancient tea house in his honor, which tea house is now a popular tourist attraction in the castle of St. Souxy. The emperor further recommended Rizal to his relative, the Emperor of Austria. Rizal arrived in Austria in 1887, and was introduced to a Jesuit priest, Father Ferdinand Blumentritt, who had recently arrived from the Philippines, where he conducted a Jesuit school on the island of Cebu. Since it was considered that the emperor may take some time to consent to the intended operation, Father Blumentritt invited Rizal to stay in his apartment. In a near apartment was a young lady, Clara Polzl, who was a staff member of the emperor's household. A liaison between Jose Rizal and Clara Polzl, who was the wife of Alois Schickler-Gruber, produced a male child, later named Adolf. The husband, Alois Schickler-Gruber, suspected that another man was responsible for the pregnancy of his wife, and he severely mistreated the child. Blumentritt decided that to avoid further mistreatment of the child, he should take the boy to Cebu, and the mother readily agreed, because she knew that Rizal would be there. And so Adolf Schickler-Gruber, as the boy had been named, came to the island of Cebu in the Philippines, where he was raised and educated. Yes, it is the same Adolf Schickler-Gruber who achieved infamy as Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was the son of Jose Rizal, via Clara Polzl. If you ever have the opportunity to visit the library at Malacanang, note as you enter the huge portrait of Jose Rizal. Then turn 180 degrees to see a smaller portrait of Adolf Hitler staring across the room at his father. It goes without saying that those who plotted the financial strategies in Malacanang were comfortably aware of the relationship between Rizal and Hitler, and the portraits are testimony to their arcane knowledge. With his fame spreading, Rizal went to Japan to perform an operation on the eyes of the emperor, and once again, a dalliance with a Japanese noblewoman, the Princess Kiko, produced a male child. The Tenno himself wrote to Rizal, and warranted that he would educate the boy in the very best schools, and so the second son of Jose Rizal would attend the finest colleges in England, and ultimately become the highest-ranking general in the Imperial Japanese Army, General Tomoyuki Yamashita. Meanwhile, the first son of Rizal was at the Jesuit school in Cebu, and saw his father only at those fleeting times that he was able to make a visit. It is considered that the reported situation of Rizal's exile in Dapitan, being sentenced to death and executed by firing squad in Bayambayan, now Rizal Park, Manila, is indeed extraordinary, highly improbable, questionable, and in view of the value of his surgical prowess, beyond reason. How could a man, known as an idol and hero to Filipinos, friend of kings and emperors, highly intelligent and speaking 12 languages, be ordered killed by the much-hated friars, and shot by 21 Guardia Civil, his countrymen, in Manila in 1896? If we look back 100 years to that incident, we should also look to the famous Battle of Manila Bay, beautifully painted, and depicted in many written words and monuments, but which never took place. the Spanish ships had surrendered before the cannons of the American ships were unleashed to fire in the air. It is reported that one American died in his cabin of a heart attack. In that context, we pose again a question mentioned in opening paragraphs of this essay. Please point out the location of the grave of José Rizal. History records that the Americans who won the war paid US $20 million to the Spanish losers of the war. Quite apart from being a lot of money at the time, it would have to be the first and only time in history that the winners paid a bounty to the losers of the war. To set the record straight, the Americans are claimed to have paid the sum of US $20 million to the Spanish, but it can be shown that the sum of $20 million was subscribed by the Magnificent Seven through a mortgage loan from Banco Español Filipino in Binondo. Observe notation 072S-2-6, 1898 on the OCT number T-01-4, which reads, quote, secured by this title OCT number T-01-4 Hacienda Mabiga embracing the province of Pampanga, Quiliot, the whole of Bamban and Capaz, Tulac has mortgaged to the Banco Español Filipino the sum of US $20 million to undertake the payment of succession treaty between Spain and America for the ceding of the archipelago by the Spanish government to the American government, be eventually reverted to the real landowner, Don Esteban Benitez Tolano. Date of inscription, February 7, 1898. Signed firm in Jordines y Alvarez AD, Interim Governor General Royal Crown of Spain. End quote. That loan by Banco Español Filipino was repaid within 1 year, and a further annotation to the OCT number T-01-4 demonstrated the means by which the money was assembled. Quote, entry number EDC 073S-2-6, 1898, real estate mortgage amounting to US $20 million secured by this land title T-01-04. Embracing the area of Hacienda Mabiga, Pampanga, Quiliot and Capaz, Tulac to Banco Español Filipino has been cancelled, and this released forever of real estate mortgage has been executed by the bank in favor of the owner with the full payment of said principal loan and an interest of US $2,200,000, the payment of which has broken as follows. General Miguel Malva correspondingly acquired the area of Tanoan, Batangas and had paid the amount of US $3,300,000. Don Servilano Aquino acquired the whole area of Bamban and Capaz, Tulac, and correspondingly paid US $3,300,000. General Antonio Luna acquired the whole San Miguel, Tulac and La Paz, Tulac and he paid US $2 million. The land was given as a gift to his girlfriend Miss Luisita Cojuanco. Don Mariano Teag acquired the area of Quiliot and Mabiga, 1,500 hectares Pampanga, and paid US $3,300,000. Don Francisco Macabulas acquired the area of Santa Ignacia, Tulac and paid US $2,400,000. Don Juan Ejército acquired absolutely the San Juan del Monte Hacienda embracing up to Sitio Mandaluyong consisting an area of 3,154 hectares, and had correspondingly paid US $3,300,000, and Don Esteban Benitez Tolano Tajian maintained his rights, being the owner over the unacquired estate, and had paid the balance of $6,600,000 US dollars. Date of inscription February 7, 1898. Signed Benito Ligada, ad interim land registrar. End quote. In short, historical records demonstrate conclusively that succession from the Spanish was purchased by Don Esteban Benitez Tolano, Taguin, and clearly that arrangement had been reached several months prior to the 1st of May, 1898 purported date for the Battle of Manila Bay. The only conclusion that can be reached in the light of such evidence is that any Battle of Manila Bay was a staged performance as opposed to an act of war or aggression. In that same context, we can conclude that the purported execution of Rizal was an equivalent pantomime, and history would repeat itself 48 years later, with the purported execution at Los Baños, Laguna, of General Tomoyuki Yamashita. No Japanese national will ever accept that General Yamashita surrendered to the Americans. a Japanese general of the highest order, and with connection to the royal household, will never surrender. Such a general is bound by the code of honor of his calling, and must commit irakiri, the ritual suicide signifying failure. Thus, whoever is buried at Muntinlupa, south of Manila, that body is not the body of General Yamashita. We do not speculate on the escape, whereabouts or post-war activities of General Yamashita, but our hypothesis, that he was not the victim of the gallows designed to dispatch him, is reinforced by the fact that no Japanese national pays homage at the shrine to General Yamashita, for the very good reason that every Japanese national knows that his surrender was impossible, and that some undefined politically inspired pantomime has played havoc in obscuring the true course of events. There are rumors that during his time at the English universities, that Yamashita became the lover of Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyons, a beautiful debutante, which liaison continued after her marriage to Albert, the then Duke of York. As the fates ordained, Albert, a sickly man, who never expected to become king, was thrust into that position as King George VI, when his elder brother Edward VIII abdicated the throne, in order to wed his paramour, the twice-divorced Mrs. Wallace Simpson. The remarkable aspect of the affair between Yamashita and Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyons, if it has substance, is that the present Queen Elizabeth II could well be a daughter of General Yamashita, and therefore, a granddaughter of Jose Antonio Rizal. So let us now summarize what we have constructed from a more pragmatic view of the stated history of the Philippines, at least in terms of reviewing impact on what has been referred to as the hidden wealth of Marcos. Prince Julian MacLeod Tolano, brother of Queen Victoria, is the father of the man later known as Jose Rizal. Jose Rizal is the father of two further important figures in world history, with those figures being the German Führer Adolf Hitler, and the Japanese General Tomoyuki Yamashita. The death of Rizal, by firing squad, is disclosed as a well-orchestrated pantomime, equally as the Battle of Manila, and post that pseudo-firing squad event, Jose Rizal became the Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz. As the son of Prince Julian MacLeod Tolano, Rizal now is Reverend Father. Jose Antonio Diaz was entrusted with the relocation and management of the massive wealth of the Tolano clan, and perhaps the fused assets of his British relatives. Thus the movement of 600,000 metric tons of gold from the Vatican to Manila, to facilitate establishment of the first central bank of the Philippines. Recall that the Tolano clan were the principal landowners of the Philippines, as evidenced by the original land title OCT number T01-4. The Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz recognized the brilliance of Ferdinand Marcos, and appointed him as counsel to all activities of Diaz relative to storage, safekeeping and employment of the wealth of his father's clan, that of the Clan Tolano. It is well known that Hitler had sent his treasure ships of looted gold and valuables to Egypt for safe storage, but when Field Marshal Montgomery defeated Field Marshal Erwin von Rommel in the North Africa campaign, he had no option other than to redirect those ships toward Japan, his last remaining ally. Fate again intervened, when the United States dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, thus hastening the Japanese surrender, and causing Hitler to redirect his treasure ships to the Philippines. With the end of World War II, and recognition that the Japanese under Prince Chichibu had stored massive looted wealth in the Philippines, Rizal, in his role as Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz, had little difficulty in identifying valuable burial sites, as he could elicit information directly from his son, General Tomoyuki Yamashita. Equally, he would have sound information from his firstborn son, Adolf Hitler, as to location of the Nazi loot. Hitler did not commit suicide in the Berlin bunker as popularly accepted, but left Tempelhof Airport in Berlin via 109 Messerschmitt, and flown to neutral Spain, where he came under protection of General Franco. Later, he returned to the Cebu of his youth, and ended his life in the Philippines. Thus, the recovery from several sites which yielded massive quantities of gold bullion, precious stones and other valuables, The recovered valuables were of course under embargo due to the statute of limitations, but Marcus, with presidential powers and authorities, was able to influence world banks and significant authorities to aid and abet him in placing those assets, so that the inherent value was preserved in favor of those agreed by Marcus and Gaius to be the ultimate beneficiaries. Does all of the above sound a little too far-fetched to attract ready acceptance as probable? Does it defy acceptance? Then let us examine a few aspects and compare those aspects with the historical record. If there was no subterfuge in the Battle of Manila Bay, then why was the considerable sum of US $20 million paid by the victor to the loser of that supposed war? While the Americans took credit in the Treaty of Paris for settling the sum of US $20 million in favor of the Spanish, we have demonstrated via notations on land deeds that the money was actually paid by Philippine landowners. Let us now look to a document of the Philippine courts, where we refer to the Pasay City decision with compromise agreement, dated the 4th of February, 1972. There is mention, at page 20, of the last surviving son of Prince Julian Macleod Tolano in the person of Jose Antonio Diaz. That name Jose Antonio Diaz is again quoted at the bottom of page 18, quote. 3. That the gold bullion lent by the royal family to the Republic of the Philippines, consisting of 650,000 metric tons now, through Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz by arrangement of the brilliant lawyer attorney Ferdinand E. Marcos in the year 1949, for the establishment of the required gold reserves of the newly installed Central Bank of the Philippines, should be maintained in the central bank vaults toward maintenance of the country's gold reserves, and the same shall be withdrawable 50 years thereafter, with 5 years moratorium. Further at page 21. That the said 640,000 metric tons of gold nuggets transported by then surviving son of Prince Julian Macleod Tolano from the Vatican after the World War, in the person of Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz, trustee of the royal family, and client of then attorney Ferdinand E. Marcos, deserves a just compensation for no less than 30% of the total value of the said 640,000 metric tons. End quote. The above LRC Civil Case 3957R is final and executory, the law of the land, and unfortunately, under temporary injunction following an urgent motion for annulment of judgment filed by the former Solicitor General Simeon Marcelo, in July 2002, at instruction of President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Case CAGRSP number 70014, based on alleged nullity of proceedings. Could it be that the intention of the oligarchs is permanent injunction, so that the gold can either be stolen, or diverted to a purpose never intended by those who provided the means for the Philippines to establish its own central bank? Certainly there is no apparent justice for the true owners of the gold, and one might well ask, why does the administration wait 30 years to bring a case for nullity of proceedings, when the matter was resolved by the courts, and made final and executory on the 4th of February, 1972? Repeating, why would an administration wait 30 years to challenge a matter which was judicially determined and enforceable at law? Has corruption so permanently entered the mainstream of government that they seek to change history to cover both misfeasance and malfeasance during their tenure? Only time will tell, but it is clear that the court has not been expedient in dealing with the case filed in July 2002, and so it could be a strategy to allow the matter to lay undecided for an indefinite period, and perhaps beyond the lifespan of legitimate claimants. The unanswered question is why. One is reminded of the American humorist Mark Twain, who in 1866 said, "No man's life, liberty, or property is safe, while the legislature is in session." Or perhaps even of Pericles, who, in 430 BC said, "Just because you do not take an interest in politics, doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you." So, now that we have made a brief journey through historical events which shaped the nation known as the Republic of the Philippines, we can reflect on what we have learned, and endeavor to speculate as to what motivated President Marcos and Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz to join forces in accumulating and placing massive wealth. The writer believes it is fair to state that President Marcos had a consuming passion to make the Philippines the most stable and progressive state in the Asian community. As a lawyer, senator and later president, it can be accepted that he was perfectly familiar with the land title claim of the Tolano clan, and equally well aware of the massive gold deposit made by that clan to establish the first central bank of the Philippines. His initial meeting with Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz must have been a revelation, because his legal brain would rapidly recognize that he was in presence of a man who represented wealth, royalty, power, and influence, and just as quickly, he recognized the outgrowth of that relationship in terms of his longer-term vision for the Philippines. It is no secret that President Marcos and Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz enjoyed a harmonious relationship lasting many years, and that they actively cooperated in multiple financial adventures designed to achieve each of their individual objectives. Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz enjoyed a unique distinction in terms of the purposes of Marcos in placing and securing valuable assets, in that he was a persona recalci, a parson, where the assets at his disposal were nominally those of the church, and thus Diaz held patrimony of those assets in his own name, essentially as a corporation sole. President Marcos obviously designed the legal strategies which encompassed and preserved the wealth, while Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz provided the wealth and high-level connection necessary to successfully domicile that wealth as instructed by President Marcos. In one unique area, Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz could identify wealth concealed by the Japanese and German forces, and the legal strategies of President Marcos could provide the domicile and protection for that recovered wealth. And so such recoveries became the centerpiece of their financial engagements. It was no easy task. Any recovery from a burial site would contain assets subject of the statute of limitations, and if fully disclosed, would attract multiple claimants. Marcos played his role masterfully by dealing astutely with the financial hyenas who habitually prey upon such assets, and several arrangements with the Pentagon, United Nations, International Monetary Fund and other august bodies preserved the assets through permitting their use by the scavengers, but retaining title to the involved principal. Deposits with banks were largely made under bailment conditions, thus assuring their security until such time as the statute of limitations lapsed. The ultimate beneficiary was kept concealed via use of a coded identification, TVMLSM 666, and all critical documents referred to the beneficiary exclusively under that code name. Finally, the assignments were made, wherein the beneficiary was fully identified by name. Originals of such assignments were handed exclusively to the chosen beneficiary, with copy to the concerned holding institution, to thus assure a trouble-free assumption of the accounts by the beneficiary at maturity. That beneficiary has been identified. Significantly, the beneficiary is again a persona recalci, and thus the multiple assignments can be activated by that beneficiary in accord with the confidential letter of instruction executed by Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz, and in the event of death or incapacity of that beneficiary, may equally be passage to the next intended beneficiary under like conditions. Now the question might well be asked. What exactly was the origin of the purported 600,000 metric tons of gold bullion subscribed by the clan Tolano to support establishment of the Central Bank of the Philippines? Was it Vatican gold? Could Tolano have acquired such a massive store of wealth as a result of a successful business career in the Dutch East Indies? The question is easily answered if one has followed the ebb and flow of power and influence on the global financial scene over the past 100 years. In the first instance, Prince Julian MacLeod Tolano controlled not only his own fortune and business income, but had an interest in the fortune of his British family, and acquired the wealth of his wife the Princess Tahata upon marriage. And the wealth of his British family? Fabulous. The kings and queens of England were drawn largely from the German nobility, and they, through land ownership via conquest, had amassed major fortunes, the majority of which was in gold. Moreover, in the immediate post-World War II aftermath, those kings and queens were well aware of the chilly winds of republicanism blowing through their domains, and having lost both land and fortunes to the fates of war, had turned to the church as depository of their remaining wealth, in order to gain the patronage of that august influence. The prevailing thought was, where safer to park your fortune than with the richest influence on earth, and therefore trustworthy and beyond venality? They neglected to consider that the Rothschild banking family had taken control of the Vatican finances in 1863, and that while they were nominally protected by the Vatican, their wealth was at disposal of the Rothschild family of bankers. England least feared the winds of republicanism due to an arrangement struck with the government when Britain became bankrupt following a major sovereign debt default, which involved the then monarch paying all of the debts of the country and assigning certain lands to the country in exchange for permanent recognition of the existing monarchy, plus a stipend to perform that role, and had, with connivance of the church, formed that 1 square mile of land now known as the City of London, to handle the financial affairs of the Crown. In that same context, it must be noted that Britain is owned, lock, stock and barrel, by the Vatican, due to breach of treaty considerations surrounding Magna Carta. The Queen, although the nominal head of the Church of England, is instructed directly by the Roman Pontiff. That condition has been in place since Magna Carta, and will remain whenever the prevailing treaties remain in existence. So, if Prince Julian Macleod Talon-Zero had proposed to his British relatives that 600,000 metric tons of gold should be loaned for purpose of funding a new central bank in the Philippines, who would object? The City of London, with its close ties to the Bank of England, had long recognized that a central bank was a prolific revenue earner, based upon the issue of credits as opposed to assignment of existing specie. The Rothschilds' banking fraternity, as controllers of the Vatican wealth, would have no objection, as such a situation favored their possible later acquisition of the new central bank as an extension of their grip on the existing Bank of England, and longer-term plan to amalgamate the central banks of the world. The Vatican itself would not object, since the gold was destined for use of a dominantly Catholic community. Voila. Prince Julian Macleod Talano would clearly have little difficulty in raising the requisite 600,000 metric tons of gold, even if he did not have access to that volume from his personal resources or Muslim family affiliations. In all truth, there were even more powerful undercurrents at work long before the period in which Prince Julian Macleod Talano assembled the 600,000 metric tons of gold. The centuries-old fight for supremacy and world hegemony between the British and Spanish crowns was in full force and effect, and there were religious interests seeking to extend their influence in the form of Islam approaching from the south, and the Catholic Church, as motivator of Spain, obliged them to approach the Philippines with the Bible in one hand, and a sword in the other. The British proved to be diplomatically superior in their efforts, as evidenced by production of the decree known as the 01-4 Protocol. In 1764, the Royal Crown of England, Great Britain, decided case number 571 in the Escribania de Cabaldo, and ordered the creation of the Hacienda of the Philippine Islands pursuant to the decree of 01-4 Protocol, by virtue of the Supreme Order of the Royal Crown of England, embracing 4 major islands consisting of 169,972,500 hectares of plains, mountains, forests, and seas, specifically the island of Luzon, 31,804,624 hectares, the islands of Palawan 3,652,875 hectares, Visayan Islands 45,996,215 hectares, and Mindanao, with 83,518,786 hectares more or less. Witness His Highness King George III of the Royal Crown of England, January 17, 1764, issued at Manila at 10:45 a.m. attested by Governor-General Damson Drake, British Governor, P.I., signed Governor Jose Rayon, Office of the Escribania de Cabaldo, Proprietary Governor. Clever, was it not? The landmass became the property of the Talano clan, and when the Treaty of Paris was executed in 1898, the victor was obliged to recognize the Talano clan as true title holders to the land mass of the Philippines. The British had protected their interests in Southeast Asia in a daring move, which had assigned the land to one of their own, the family of Prince Julian MacLeod Tolano, brother of Queen Victoria, thus defeating all efforts of the Spanish to retain possession of the archipelago. And so we can repeat that Prince Julian MacLeod Tolano would have experienced no difficulty whatever in assembling the 600,000 metric tons of gold, because it all stayed in the family. It would be a valid assumption to suggest that Britain held a dominant position from date of issue of the Decree of 01-4 Protocol. The Spanish were in possession of the Philippine Islands, but lost their colonial powers to the USA. The Spanish tried to maintain a foothold with their invalid Tachulodi Propriedad in the name of Hermogenes Rodriguez, and with many Spanish land titles coming from Friars land, as if the Friars were the original owners of land in the Philippines. The Friars were not, and never were, original landowners. The owners of the land are indisputably the royal family of the Philippines, the Tolano-Taguian clan, originally in the name of Prince Lacan Acuna Tolano-Taguian. In order to appreciate the intrinsic value of gold at the time of deposit to Central Bank of the Philippines, it must be recalled that gold was then regularly traded at between $27 and $30 per troy ounce, and not the $1,000 plus figure we note today. Even allowing a then price of $1 million per metric ton, the value of the deposit at date of completion would have been in the order of USD 600 billion. Today, of course, that value is in excess of $30 trillion, but the loan was a bailment which established the creditworthiness of the new central bank, and so the appreciated value is of no concern, because the contract calls simply for return of the original deposit as gold, plus agreed interest. The key question is, will it ever happen? Note the words of Albert Einstein, the world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. The currently undecided case CAGRSP number 70014, based on alleged nullity of proceedings, lays on the court table, unheard, at 8 years after its filing in 2002. The intention of the oligarchs is unclear, but it is certainly unprecedented for an administration to challenge the law of the land by seeking to overturn a ruling which became executory some 30 years prior to challenge. We should not leave this essay without some further explanation of the activities and role of Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz, Jose Rizal in the momentous events which have so markedly impacted Philippine history. It can be shown that the Reverend Father was not a passive participant in the looting and reallocation of the golden treasure of Europe and Asia, but took an active role in its movement and processing. His academic achievements are well documented in multiple publications, but here we are far more interested in his activities relative to looted treasure. Little is officially known or recorded about a certain Jose Antonio Diaz de la Paz who became papal nuncio, and was invited to be the new pope in February 1922. He declined. He had more important things to do. He was chosen by the royal families to be the trustee for all the gold left by the royal families. They had entrusted him already with their rise, and so they could as readily entrust him their gold which was now lying secretly in the Vatican's caverns in Benevento, Italy. Jose Antonio Diaz, formerly Jose P. Rizal, decided he would bring all the gold to the Philippines. Nobody would look for it there. It did not last long. There seemed to be a build-up for another war. The former owners of the gold got nervous. Pope Pius XI got old. All the while Hitler's SS silently and secretly ransacked the faraway bonded warehouses of the British banks, and brought the gold more often than not in submarines to Singapore, where it was delivered and handed over in brief ceremonies to the Japanese Imperial Army under Hitler's half-brother Tomoyuki Yamashita. The submarines headed back, so that nobody would discover the subterfuge. Jose Antonio Diaz shipped the 650,000 metric tons back to the Vatican, with a quip, "If that is what you want." Note: 10 years later Pope Pius XII asked him to bring it back to Manila. See Agana decision. There were no telecommunications in the form we understand today, but we can imagine that Jose Antonio Diaz or Jose P. Rizal, Adolf Hitler, and Tomoyuki Yamashita knew what they were doing. They were the original Axis powers established during the Berlin Olympics, where Japan's Emperor Hirohito visited Hitler, formalized with Italy in the 1940 Tripartite Pact. They did the planning and they plundered the gold, Hitler in the West, Japanese forces in the East. They came together and met in Singapore, which was then officially a British Crown colony, and had the smelting of the gold done by the expert German company, de Gusser. From there, the gold was brought to the Philippines, to be buried under supervision of Prince Chichibu, and to become known as the infamous Yamashita treasure. We are talking of a time prior to the start of World War II, generally accepted as being September 1, 1939, when Hitler ordered his generals to take Poland in one day. We could argue that the start of World War II was much earlier, perhaps in 1937, when the Imperial Japanese Army raided and took China, killing more than 300,000 Chinese during one day in Nanking. That was 6 years after Japan had started the military invasion of China, in order to capture the Manchuria province in China's north, which had all the natural resources that Japan so importantly needed, in order to support a war effort. It was also in 1931 that Japan started to invade, albeit silently, the Philippines. Mostly civil engineers in disguise, the Japanese started to build a wide array of tunnels and caves, thus indicating that they prepared well ahead for the burial of the gold that would come from Europe and China. The gold that Hitler and his Japanese allies stole from the richest of the rich on both sides, from those who had money enough to buy gold, stash it away in secret bank vaults, so that they would not have to pay tax, was listed, immediately following the war, in the International Court of Justice World Court in The Hague, Holland. The total of the missing gold was 946,000 metric tons, and it is still missing. The World Court had ruled that all gold found from buried treasure in the Philippines would, legally, belong to the original claimants of World War II loot. Until today there has not been a single claimant. The claims are listed per country. There are 13 countries claiming. No names of persons or families are tendered. The Federal Reserve, the U.S. Treasury, the International Bank for Settlement, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank are patently aware of the location of the gold, and to them, it is the same as if the gold was stashed secretly in America. So, Jose Protasio Rizal / Reverend Father Jose Antonio Diaz de la Paz was an active participant in concealment and masking of the stolen treasures of World War II. Yes, he was a patriot. Yes, he was an accomplished and sophisticated person. Yes, he was a friend of royalty across a broad spectrum, and to the end he served the Philippines, as his letter of instruction, which details what is to be done with the accumulated wealth, demands that its primary objective be specific projects for betterment of the Philippines. Whether subscribing to the accuracy of published history, or influenced by the revelations of this essay, it must be admitted that Jose Rizal was first and foremost a patriot, even if his modus operandi was unorthodox in the extreme. Perhaps we should silently hope that his vision is realized, along with that of President Marcos, his accomplice in the world's most incredible seizure and conversion of stolen wealth. The Philippines cries out for administrative reform. It has a poverty index equivalent to sub-Saharan Africa, and land reform, which should be a keystone in correcting that situation, is totally ignored by all administrations. Hernando de Soto, in his masterpiece The Mystery of Capital, provided a profound study of the land laws of the Philippines, and demonstrated conclusively that land reform was the key element in the elimination of poverty and awakening of the entrepreneurial spirit that is the backbone of every great nation. Perhaps such reform is frustrated by considerations surrounding the land title OCT number T-01-4, but the present representatives of the Talano clan are not ogres, and genuinely subscribe to the suggestion that land reform is critical, and they will cooperate in a meaningful way to assist such reform. In terms of infrastructure, the beneficiary known by the code TVMLSM 666 is equally enthusiastic to share the vision of President Marcos and Reverend Father Diaz, to assure that the Philippines becomes the most stable and progressive state in the Asian community. The individual entrepreneurship of the Philippine national is evidenced by an underground economy which has been suggested as larger than the published figures of government. Ergo, the three critical elements for reform in all aspects of empowerment of the Philippines are present, in way, means and will. What then will be the catalyst which fuses those critical elements into a national upwelling of interest, to generate a Philippines of promise? If one were to provide a definition of government, we can suggest that such a definition would be to provide and maintain an environment in which its people may live peacefully and prosper. If we can accept that definition, perhaps we are obliged to look to the administration as the catalyst which fuses the way, means and will. Let them lead, and the people will follow in devout appreciation of the opportunity to assume control of their own lives. Tax revenues will increase, harmony will reign within the population, and all will be well with the world. Where is the leader who will recognize the available tools, then grasp the initiative, and lead the Philippines toward the destiny so long planned, and so painfully delayed, by forces concerned more with their own welfare than welfare of the country they were elected to manage with perception and integrity? Vidamus. Manila, the 1st of January, 2011.